Nobody could explain what they saw that Saturday morning in Calabar market. Not the yam seller who had been sitting in that same spot for 11 years. Not the young men who had been standing nearby doing nothing in particular until they suddenly had something to look at. Not the women who had been bargaining loudly over tomatoes 2 stores away and found themselves frozen mid-argument. Not a single one of the 30 or so people who had gathered in that circle could offer an explanation that made any sense when the police came asking later that evening. What they could agree on was this. A woman had been sitting on the ground, her legs useless beneath her husband shouting at a crippled beggar to undo what he had done. The crowd had gathered, the beggar had made an offer, the husband had refused, then been talked into agreeing. The beggar had opened his arms, the woman had reached up, and then both of them were gone. They disappeared. That was what 30 people saw in Calabar market on a Saturday morning. None of them could explain it. But it had not started there. It had started like every other day. The morning started the way most of their Saturday mornings did, with the smell of burnt toast. Adaeze had a habit of putting bread on the fire and then wandering off to do something else, fully convinced in her heart that she would remember to come back before it burnt. She never did. In 7 years of marriage, Emeka could not recall a single Saturday morning where the first smell that greeted him was not charred bread and his wife's unbothered voice saying, "Ah, I forgot it again." He heard it that morning too, right on schedule.
"Emeka, the bread burned!"
He was still in bed, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling fan that wobbled slightly on every rotation. It had been wobbling for 3 months. He kept meaning to fix it. "I know," he called back. "I could smell it from my sleep." "Don't be rude. Come and eat." He smiled at the ceiling and got up. The kitchen was small and warm. Adaeze was standing at the counter, scraping the black parts off 2 slices of bread with a knife, completely focused, as though she could undo the burning through sheer dedication. She was wearing her house dress, the yellow one with the small flowers that she had owned since before they got married and refused to throw away no matter how many times he suggested it. Her hair was wrapped in a scarf and her feet were bare on the tile floor. Emeka pulled out a chair and sat at the table. "You know scraping it doesn't really help," he said. "It helps me feel better," she replied, not looking up. He watched her for a moment, this woman and her burnt toast and her yellow dress and her bare feet, and felt the quiet kind of love that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just sits in the chest like something warm. She set a plate in front of him. The bread was scraped unevenly, one side was still slightly black. There was an egg beside it, fried the way he liked, and a cup of tea that was already the right temperature, because she always made his tea first and let it cool while she made everything else. He ate without complaining about the bread.
She sat across from him with her own plate and pulled out a small piece of paper from nowhere. She was always producing small pieces of paper, and began going through the market list out loud.
Tomatoes, pepper, crayfish, palm oil. We finished the palm oil on Wednesday.
"I want to make edikaikong this week, so I need the water leaf and the ugu fresh, not the ones that have been sitting since yesterday. Emeka, are you listening?"
Tomatoes, pepper, crayfish, palm oil, stockfish, water leaf, ugu.
She seemed satisfied with that and went back to her list. After breakfast, she washed the plates while he went to have a bath. By the time he came out, she was already dressed, a blue Ankara skirt and a simple white blouse, her market bath hanging on her shoulder, standing by the door with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for at least 10 minutes, even though he knew for certain she had only been ready for 2. "You take long," she said. "I was fast," he said. "Let's go before the good tomatoes finish." He picked up his keys and they left. The drive to the market was short, only about 15 minutes through the Calabar morning traffic that was already picking up, even though it was barely 8 o'clock. Adaeze sat in the passenger seat with her bag on her lap, occasionally telling him to slow down on bumps he had already seen and was already slowing down for. He said nothing. He had learned that this was one of those things that would never change. They found a place to park not too far from the main entrance, which Adaeze declared was a good sign for the day. She was the kind of woman who read meaning into small things. A good parking spot meant a good day, burnt toast meant nothing at all. The market swallowed them the moment they stepped in. It was the usual Saturday chaos, loud, colorful, overwhelming in the best way. Women sat behind towering displays of vegetables and spices, calling out to passers-by in that particular market voice that was somehow both aggressive and friendly at the same time. Wheelbarrow men wove through the crowd, calling way, way. Men argued over prices with the focused energy of people who had been doing this their whole lives. The air smelled of raw fish and pepper and something frying somewhere nearby. Adaeze was in her element. She moved through the market the way someone moves through their own house, confidently, with purpose, stopping where she wanted to stop and walking past what didn't interest her. Emeka followed, holding the bags, occasionally offering a price suggestion that she ignored, and generally existing as a pleasant piece of furniture. They got the tomatoes first, then the pepper, then the crayfish, where Adaeze spent 4 full minutes negotiating a price difference of 50 naira with the focus of someone negotiating a land deal. She won. She always won. The crayfish seller looked tired but unsurprised. They were moving toward the palm oil section when Adaeze slowed down. Emeka almost walked into her. "Wait," she said. He looked up from the bag he was rearranging. She was looking to the left, toward the edge of a row, the corner between a yam seller and the woman displaying piles of second-hand clothes. He followed her gaze. There was a man sitting there on the ground. He was crippled, his legs bent at angles that didn't look comfortable, a faded brown kaftan hanging off his thin frame. In front of him sat a small rusty tin cup with a few coins inside. He wasn't begging aggressively, wasn't calling out, wasn't doing anything at all, really. He just sat there with his eyes moving slowly across the crowd, like someone who had been in that spot a long time and made peace with being ignored. Adaeze was already opening her bag. "Emeka, we still have a lot to buy." "I know," she said, pulling out her purse. "It will take 2 seconds." He recognized the tone. The conversation was already over. She walked over to the man, crouched slightly so she wasn't looming over him, and placed a 500 naira note gently into the cup. She didn't drop it from a height like some people gave to beggars, like they were afraid to get too close. She actually placed it in, her fingers going all the way to the bottom of the cup. "God bless you," she said to him with a smile that was genuine. The man looked at the note. Then he looked at her. And then his hand moved. It came out fast, faster than anyone sitting on the ground with broken legs had any right to move, and wrapped around her wrist. His fingers were cold. Not the cool of the morning, not the cold of the harmattan, something else entirely. A cold that had no explanation under an open sky in a busy market. Adaeze made a sound that Emeka had never heard her make before, a short, sharp gasp, like the air had been pulled out of her. Then her legs stopped walking. She went down without warning, her body folding beneath her market bag sliding off her shoulder, her scarf slightly loose on the left side. She hit the ground and just sat there, her legs splayed in front of her eyes wide and blinking rapidly, her mouth opened with no words coming out. The crippled man let go of her wrist and settled back into his position like nothing had happened, like he had merely reached out to accept her money and that was all. The tin cup sat between them. The 500 naira note rested inside. "Adaeze," Emeka said. Emeka was beside her in 3 steps, his knees hitting the ground, his hands going to her face and her arms. "Adaeze, what happened?" "Emeka, I cannot feel my legs." He looked at the man. The man looked back at him, calm, patient, like a person who has heard what is coming next many times before. The anger that moved through Emeka in that moment was not the hot, fast kind. It was slower than that. It started somewhere deep in his stomach and rose through his chest and filled his throat until his hands were shaking and his jaw was tight and the only thing in his entire world was the man sitting on the ground.
What did you do to my wife? I am talking to you. You touched her and she fell. What
did you do? The shout came out before he planned it. And once it came out, it kept going. He was shouting now, pointing, demanding, his voice rising above the market noise in a way that made heads turn from rows away. He didn't care. He could hear himself shouting, and part of him understood that shouting at a man on the ground in a market was not a strategy, but strategy had left him the moment his wife hit the floor. The market responded the way markets always respond to a scene, It gathered. People drifted over with the casual inevitability of water finding a low point. Traders abandoned their stores for a moment. Buyers stopped mid-negotiation. A group of young men who had been doing nothing in particular suddenly had somewhere to be. Within 2 minutes, there was a ring of people around them, 20, 30, growing, all pushing slightly forward to get a better view, all talking at once. Wetin happen? The man said the cripple touch him wife and she fall. She fall how? She's sick. No, look at her. She's just sitting there. She cannot get up. Na juju. That one na juju straight. In this market, in broad daylight, my brother, broad daylight is their favorite time. Emeka turned to the crowd. Someone should call the police. This man did something to my wife. Someone help me. The crowd murmured, but nobody moved toward a phone. They were interested in the situation, but nobody was ready to make it their problem in that particular way. Then the man spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He simply opened his mouth and said it clearly and calmly, in a way that somehow reached every person in that circle, despite the noise around them. If you want her to walk, he said, let me hug her. The crowd erupted immediately. Hug? Hug ke? What kind of nonsense is that? This man is not well.
Emeka laughed, a short, hard laugh that had no humor in it. You want to hug my wife? After what you have done to her, you are asking me to let you put your hands on her again?
You want to touch her again? I will not allow it. Never. I will rather carry her out of this market on my back.
Brother, the voice came from his left, an older man, a trader by the look of his clothes, with a calm face and kind eyes. He rested a hand briefly on Emeka's shoulder. I hear you, the man said, and I understand why you are angry. Any man in your position would be angry, but look at your wife. Emeka looked. Adaeze was still on the ground. She had stopped trying to get up. She was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, watching him with an expression that broke something in him quietly. She cannot walk, the trader continued. That is the reality right now. You can fight this man, you can call the police, you can shout from now until evening, but at the end of it, your wife will still be sitting on this ground. This man is offering a solution. Maybe it is a strange solution, maybe it makes no sense, but your wife is on the ground. Others came in after him. It is just a hug, Oga. What can happen from a hug? You don't already see say this man get power. If him say hug go heal am, maybe not true. Think about your wife, not your ego. Brother, we are all witnesses here. Nothing will happen to her. We are all watching. In Calabar, these things are real. The faster you accept the situation, the better for everyone. Emeka looked at each face as they spoke. These were strangers. None of them had been standing next to him when his wife placed that money in the cup. None of them had heard her laugh in his car 20 minutes ago. None of them would go home with him tonight. But they were not entirely wrong either, and he hated that. He looked at the crippled man one more time. The man had not moved, had not begged, had not threatened or bargained or raised his voice. He just sat there offering this one condition. Emeka. Her voice, barely a whisper. He turned to her. She was looking up at him from the ground, her eyes wet, her hand still folded in her lap. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. 7 years of marriage meant he could read everything in those 2 syllables of his own name. She was scared. She was tired. She wanted to go home. She was asking him to let it happen. He stood there for a long moment. Every part of him said no. Every instinct he had built up as a man who protected his own said that you do not give a person who has harmed your wife a second opportunity to touch her, that nothing good comes from rewarding that kind of evil with cooperation, that something about this was deeply, fundamentally wrong. But his wife was on the ground. Fine, he said. 2 men who were strangers to Adaeze stepped forward without being asked and helped her sit up more comfortably. The crippled man rose. That was the first thing that made the crowd go quiet. He didn't struggle, he didn't ask for help. He simply rose from the ground where he had been sitting, and his legs, his twisted, folded, broken-looking legs, carried him forward without any difficulty at all. He opened his arms. Adaeze looked up at Emeka. Emeka looked at her. He gave her a small nod. She reached up. The man bent down and wrapped his arms around her, and the market held its breath. 30 people, maybe more, all of them frozen in the same half second. And then they were gone.
No sound, no flash of light, no smoke or wind, or any of the things that should accompany something so impossible. They were simply there, and then they were not. The only thing that remained was Adaeze's wrapper, which had been tucked around her legs, which now floated down slowly, almost gently, and settled onto the dusty ground in the shape of where she had been sitting. 3 seconds of complete silence. Then the market came apart. A woman screamed somewhere to the right, and it triggered everything else. People running, shouting, stumbling over each other, calling on God in 3 different languages, market stalls rattling as people knocked into them in their panic. A man dropped a full bag of rice and left it there. People were running in every direction, and none of them could have told you which direction was the right one to run, because there was no right direction. There was no logic to apply here. 2 people had vanished from the middle of a crowd in broad daylight, and there was simply nothing in anyone's experience that had prepared them for that. Emeka did not run. He stood exactly where he had been standing. He stood there while the crowd scattered and the screaming faded, and the market slowly, uncertainly, began to breathe again. He stood there and stared at the empty space in front of him, at the wrapper on the ground, at the rusty tin cup that was still sitting in the corner with its few coins and the 500 naira note inside it. After a while, he crouched down and picked up the wrapper. He brought it to his chest and held it there.
This is not a made-up story. It happened in Calabar. Real market, real people, real Saturday morning. Until today, nobody, not the police, not the witnesses, not the elders who have seen many strange things in this life, has been able to explain what happened. Nobody knows where the crippled man came from. Nobody knows where he took her. And nobody knows how many times before Adaeze he had sat in that same corner with his rusty tin cup, waiting for someone kind enough to put their fingers all the way to the bottom. The market is still there. And if you ever find yourself in Calabar market and you see a man sitting alone in a corner, do not let him touch your hand.